Yes, ma'am, over here.
Is it on? Oh.
Please address it to a particular person.
Yes, maybe about me at first. I'm a student from Germany studying industrial engineering for sustainability and environment. And I have one question to two men over there, Mr. Gudjonsson and Mr. Hansen. I think it's really interesting because we talked the whole day about climate change and what effect it already has and what effect it will have in the future on the whole world. And then there was this topic about Arctic energy cooperation. And it's so interesting that still energy is just about oil and gas. And you still want to exploit more and more. And I think, like, why? How really can you sit there and say you want to have more gas and oil, whether we know where the climate change is coming from and that we are the source of it? Really, why do you not invest into other energies?
Yeah, maybe I will try to answer. Well, of course, burning fossil fuels does pollute, but they don't all pollute equally. Burning coal, for instance, is much more pollutive. So if you actually extract gas, you're able to lessen the dependency on, for instance, the more harming coal. So in that regard, you're actually doing nature a favor in that regard. However, if you just look at the supply situation, I'm an economist, so if you really want to hinder the carbon dioxide and all of that, you should tax the use. You should tax the demand rather than taxing the supply. That's a much more effective way to reduce emissions, in my view.
Okay.
Either of you gentlemen want to add anything? No. Just if you had another comment, I thought you might, from an oil industry perspective.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you for the question. It's quite relevant, but the only thing which I could add is that we are talking about oil and gas. It's right. We are investing a lot also in other energy, but as long as the demand is there, we are supplying the world with energy. So it's very much about the demand. So as long as we have demand for the oil and gas, someone has to supply it. And we are one of the company who is doing that. So it depends very much on the demand. And as I was saying also that we believe that demand in the future will still be very high for oil and gas, even though the other energy is going to increase, but still probably in 20, 30 years, oil and gas will contain about 70–80% of the total demand in the world. So that's the reason we are still exploring for oil and gas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. I do want to add another comment to this, because what you've put your finger on, in my view, in fact, is a very central issue, and it's the issue of energy policy. And what we see in the world right now is a big bun fight between the coal guys, the oil guys, the nuclear guys, the hydro guys, the wind guys, the solar panel guys. And the laws are oriented to mediate that bun fight between energy sources. And what we really need is to look at the demand, because what people are interested in are the services provided by energy, the light, the heat, the ability to cook, the ability to move, and we want those services. But our energy policies are not starting from that point. They are starting from a mediation of bun fights. And I think we have to change that, because the greatest opportunities for reducing our energy use come from looking at the services that energy provides and most efficiently and effectively matching a source to that service, rather than simply arguing about a particular form of energy in response to an ever-increasing demand. Now that takes you into difficult terrain for policy guys, because it means looking at free market versus something else, and that's dangerous territory.
Let's take a question over on this side, and please identify yourself.
My name is Leandra Cooper, and I am a student at the University of Iceland in their master program for environmental and natural resources. And my question has to do actually with the term sustainable development, because it's one that is used frequently, especially with regards to resource development. But I mean, if we really look at what sustainability means, it means that it's a system that is capable of maintaining. So in this sense, you're really talking just about continual development, and that's not necessarily an environmental term, and that doesn't exactly have much meaning on its own. And especially when we're talking about the development of and resource extraction of a resource that, in terms of the human lifetime at least, is finite, then it's kind of an oxymoron. There really is no sustainability, or at least when we use it as such, it's short-sighted. And then, so in terms of the physical capacity of the resource to be sustainable, it really kind of isn't there. And then when we look at it in terms of sustainability economically, I mean, you talk about the demand increasing, and certainly as demand increases per capita, and as the population increases, then we're getting more demand for a resource that, even if we find a little bit more in the short term, that in the grand scheme of things is really still finite. So my question is really to the, kind of the same gentleman or anyone who would like to regard it is what actually are we talking about then when we talk about sustainable development?
This is, in my view, a very, very important question. In the world that I'm currently living in mining, no mine will go on forever. It will end, period. There's no question about that. So in that sense of sustainability, it doesn't apply. But you know, if you look over the history of humankind, communities have come and gone. They are also not sustainable. So what is this issue? And what it has to do with at its heart is that if we embark on a human activity, which inevitably is going to end, but if we embark on a human activity, what we want it to be is a human activity that on the long term will make a net positive contribution to people and the ecosystems that are our home around us. If human activities together over the long term are not making that net positive contribution, we're pulling the rug out from underneath ourselves. If you do things that are terrific for people and not for the environment, we're finished. If you do things that are terrific for the environment and people die as a result, we're finished. From an engineering point of view, it's like a two-dimensional design criteria, and it is profoundly significant. So it's not about something that is going to end going on forever. It is about the kind of quality of our existence that we need to see enhance over time. And I'll give you a little analogy about the word development. Do you know, I was born I started growing. I got physically bigger. Many people may not know that by about 35, you're all shrinking. I'm shrinking big time now. But I sure hope that I'm still developing. And what does that mean? It means that I am gaining in my capacity to use my gifts, to contribute on the long term in a net positive way. And that's the issue, in my view, that we are talking about. And quite frankly, Gro Harlem Brundtland understood that when she popularized it.
If I could just make one comment, and I think the thrust of your comment is, not to put words in your mouth, is that we're relying on fossil fuels. But you have to be very careful when you say sustainability. We've had this argument for a long time in energy circles, have we reached peak oil? Well, peak oil, as far as I'm concerned, was never very smart, because when you ask a question, when is a resource going to run out, unless you answer the question, what are your price assumptions and what are your technology assumptions? You know, just a few years ago in the United States, we thought, like 2008, we thought within a decade we'd be importing 40% of our natural gas. But the development of a new technology that unleashed shale gas, now the United States and North America are awash in gas. So that may, in your view, be good or bad, but we are awash in gas because technology changed. When oil goes above $100 a barrel, we go out and look for oil in places like the Arctic, which we don't look at $50 a barrel. And the same is true, I think, probably in the mining sector. So you have to be very careful. What you have to think about, and I think if you look at any energy study, the world is unfortunately going to be dependent on fossil fuels for a long time to come. Now, we can do a lot to slow that rate of growth, but it's still a reality. And one of the difficulties is a lot of fossil fuels in the world today, natural gas in my country, are so cheap. Nobody wants to go out and develop something more expensive. So we're now making a dash to gas and saying this is wonderful because it's backing up what was said earlier, dirtier coal. And ironically, the United States now, because of the switch from coal to gas, is almost at the target if we had agreed to sign the Kyoto Protocol that we would have been obligated to do. And we've done it purely because of forces in the market, not, unfortunately, because of government policy. I just caution you have to be careful. You talk about phasing out coal in India because of climate change. 10 million people produce coal in India. Now, are you going to throw 10 million people out of work? We've got a lot of people here representing Alaska and from remote villages in Alaska. Yes, it has impacted those people's lives, but it has also impacted those people's lives, oil development of oil, in a positive way. They have schools, they have community centers, roads, things they didn't used to have. And I'm sure there are some people in the room who long for the previous time. But there are benefits to this as well as costs. And I think that's what you have to be careful of.
Maybe I could add one point. Like, for instance, in the old days here in Iceland, and especially in the US, the whaling industry was big. It was a big business because the whale blubber was the illuminator. It illuminated the homes. So it was basically the invention of the oil industry which saved the whales, if you think about it. Because kerosene, which was in 1855, they started working it out of crude oil, it became the other illuminator. So I'm just trying to draw a lesson here, because it's just as Charles mentioned, it's the change in technology, which we can't foresee, but we know is there, that always takes us on. And I'm inherently an optimist. The Malthusian economists, they foresaw an end to mankind before even mankind reached 1 billion. Well, when I was born in the 70s, it was 3 billion. When I retire around 2040, there will be around 10 billion. So how are we going to provide all these people with quality of life? It happens with technological advances. And just like has been mentioned in the past, the Stone Age did not come to an end because people ran out of stones. We simply move on.
You've been very patient.
My name is Pinkas Javits, and hello, Charlie.
Hi, how are you?
Now, my question is of a different kind. We heard about 8 sovereign nations in the Arctic Circle. We heard that Antarctica has no sovereignty whatsoever. Now, what regime do you expect in the area beyond 200 miles? Who is going actually to be allowed to do any kind of mining or exploration? And who is supposed to give the license?
I could be a little off in my numbers, but I think maybe the Russian ambassador this morning noted that if you take the 200 miles and some additional extensions that certain people are saying they are entitled to, I think the number is about 97% of the area is covered. Now that still leaves 3%, but I think the argument would be that that would be covered by the law of the sea if my own country would get off its whatever and decide to sign the law of the sea treaty. But if we, I think everything when I ask people that question, the answer I get, it would be covered by the law of the sea treaty if more nations would sign.
If I may add, there is a concept at the UN that actually that should become a kitty to help in climate change. The law of the sea doesn't include really, because in effect, nations that thought that they have the technology didn't want everybody else to go and get something out of the sea. That means the law of the sea is pretty empty on that. But if this is declared as a global property, then the funding could help do other very good things. So that should be something that now it becomes important.
Yes, hello, thank you. My name is Mikko Merad. I'm CEO of Polaris Consulting in London. The question I'm going to ask is about energy, but in a different kind of way. We know that the security component is a huge component in the debate in Greenland about uranium mining. And today, in your presentation on Korean energy policy, you mentioned the fact that Korea was about to almost triple the nuclear energy part of its energy mix. So my question to you is very simple. Would you say that today the relationship between Korea and Greenland is one of the most strategic for the Republic of Korea?
Hello? Yes. Thank you for your questions. I gave presentations about the energy mix and the plan of the Korea's government. And just one thing that I want to make sure is that if the security on nuclear the energy is somewhat there, I think that how you protect to run the nuclear power plants is the first thing that we want to
Actually, there's not that kind of security I was referring to. I was referring to the security of exportations, in the sense that in the debate, some people are saying that if you export uranium from Greenland, because of many reasons, the yellow cake could fall off into the wrong hands. So I was talking about security in that sense, not security of the nuclear process.
Actually, the Ministry of Industry and Energy Resources, I think, is a MOTIA, because I'm from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I know the MOTIA is in charge of all the energy issues. If you want to give me your contact points, I can get some information from the MOTIA and then provide you with the information. How about that?
Thank you.
I do want to pick up on this. It's a question that's very, very close to my heart for a bunch of reasons, and not just anything to do with mining. And what I want to start with is that we've heard on the panel here some expressions of I would call it technological optimism. I'm an optimist. The lessons from the nuclear energy are fantastic in how technological optimism got utterly out of hand. If you go back to coming out of the Second World War and see how nuclear industry developed out of a horror that was unleashed on the world, you certainly can see immediately why nuclear energy was created. It was trying to take a horror and make it positive, and it did it spectacularly. But they utterly underestimated the risks related to the storage of waste products and the security issue that you put your finger on. This is why this may seem strange to people here, but this is why this meeting is so critical from my point of view, and that is that the solution to those things, the lack of trust that exists, that we can embark on a world that would include nuclear energy and therefore reduce greenhouse gas emissions and have an impact on helping that side of the equation. That lack of trust is impeded by the fact that the industry itself has royally shot itself in the foot by overemphasizing its technological optimism. But it's not to say that with appropriate resources and the discipline that's required, we cannot have nuclear energy without controlling this security issue that you talk about and without ensuring that the waste products are managed in perpetuity very, very well. It requires a kind of discipline, and the key to it, and this may seem strange coming from an engineer, the key to it is the vigilance that is required from transparency and allowing everyone to see what is going on so they can know that it's been done properly. That's what the security will come from. One of the problems we're still working with is that everything's hidden. And I think it's only through transparency, ultimately, and opening up the systems that we will have the degree of security and the degree of trust that will make that part of the solution possible worldwide?
I would just like to add, because this is a bugbear with me, no one is going to make an atomic bomb with uranium. You have to have either an enrichment facility, which is a very costly, or a reprocessing plant in order to make a nuclear bomb. Most nations in the world get their enriched uranium from a handful of nations, including the United States. The only other issue on uranium I think you have to be very careful of, unlike oil, uranium is infinitesimal cost of the nuclear fuel cycle. And so it's not, and it fluctuates widely as a commodity. Right now we have uranium prices very, very low relative to their swings. The other thing I would only caution Greenland on uranium is that I do a lot of work in this area, by any objective standard, there is no shortage of uranium in the world for the commercial nuclear reactors that are going to be built before 2100. It is not necessarily, unless you truly emerge as a low cost producer, it may not be the great bonanza that people think it will be. I think we're over here.
Hi, my name is Mia Bennett. I am the Foreign Policy Association's Arctic blogger and a PhD student in geography at UCLA in California. I had a question for Mr. Bai Sung-ho. I was quite interested in your little explanation about Korea's recent study into the gas hydrates in the Beaufort Sea. So I was wondering if you could perhaps explain a bit more, I know it's in the early stages, about how you might think gas hydrates could possibly fit into Korea's future energy mix. And two, I know Japan is also interested in this resource, so do you think there's any potential collaboration between Korea and Japan in the Arctic on this type of research? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Cooperating with Japan is, I think, like I just mentioned, that President Park Geun-hye has visited Asian states. I think we'll include Japan in a few days. Talk about the energy cooperation, of course. But if we're in consensus, I believe we're going to cooperate in any ways possible. And about the gas hydrates, the Korea is looking at to import some shale gas. And I just mentioned about the importing, possibly changing the importing routes, diversifying the importing routes, maybe the gas. But we're looking at the possible cooperation with North America and Europe. And about the gas hydrates, like I just said, the evidence we found, it's a very, it has a high potential that there are a lot of big, huge amounts of gas hydrates in the Arctic. So I think it's a future energy, and if it's successful in many more days, I know we're going to do some more explorations, but it's a future energy, and if there are some by explorations, successful explorations, I think it's going to be a huge for us.
Thank you.
We have about 3 minutes left, so people can ask brief questions and brief answers from the panel, please.
I'm Bente Osjord, representing Fagforbundet, which is the biggest labor union in Norway. We organize people working in public and private sector. 80% of them are women. This panel was introduced by a statement from Charles Ebinger, where he defined the panel as a very diverse panel. For me, you seem very much alike.
Could we get a question?
Anthony Hart's presentation emphasized the importance of communication and dialogue with local communities you are operating in to act in accordance with the community's values. But I have to remind that women plays a crucial role in local communities, also in the Arctic, both regarding shaping values and running the social fabric. in this regard, I think it's a little bit strange with such a panel without commenting at all the lack of women. How come?
Charlie, I'm going to bail you out on this one. You can blame me. This panel came about without Charlie having handpicked it. The fact of the matter is, if there are women who should have been on this panel, we did not know who they were. And so please, I'm giving you my business card. We'll be having many more such meetings. We bring them on. On behalf of Mrs. Hammond and Hillary Clinton, myself, and every other woman who is now struggling to find women to be the correct role models. Thank you, my fault.
We'll go over here. Quickly, please.
Sven Roald Nystø from a Sami Center in Norway. My question goes on the relationship between mining companies and communities. We see lack of trust between the mining companies and communities. So how do we facilitate trust-building initiatives in order to improve the relations between companies and communities? And how do we build up capacities in the communities in order to take part in such work?
Yeah, maybe I will try to answer, because the option for us Icelanders was basically to have our potential oil fields being harvested and explored by just outsiders. So we started thinking, is that a responsible attitude for ourselves? Just say, well, we don't know anything about this industry and we're just going to let other people manage it. So what we thought was that maybe we will try to participate and we will do our best. We will commit capital, we'll commit human capital, and we'll try to draw on those limited resources we have and gain international resources to back us up. So we thought it was responsible to participate ourselves. We're not a big participant in the licenses, for instance, on the Jan Mayen Ridge, but we still own around a 15% stake, along with Asian partners, and we have a big say. We have a seat at the table. We have a veto on any big decision, and even a big say on small decisions. So I think, at least in my experience, that was our way to participate and not feel left out.
I'm going to answer by giving you an example of where it worked and is working. But the question you pose is vast, and one thing that you cannot do is assume that there is an off-the-shelf formula like a chemistry textbook. It is culturally specific, it is activity specific, and it is different everywhere. There is a mine, it's a bauxite mine in the Amazon, that is owned by a company. And the activity, the mine, was marked by direct conflict between the company and the community for a long time. They couldn't get it going. Someone emerged that realized that there had to be a different kind of relationship built. He was respectful of the fact that for understanding the concerns of the community, the experts are the community. You cannot hire a consultant to go in and do some notes for you and then go back to head office and get them to tell you what to do. The experts on the concerns and values of the community are the community themselves. So step number one is moving beyond the kind of paternalistic attitude towards different levels of people that has been, in fact, characteristic of many in the mining industry for centuries, which is that you are bigger, you are better, and the low people in the community are there to serve. It doesn't work anymore. So in this particular case, they built a series of initiatives that included the creation of a fund that would be governed by a joint governance mechanism that involved the community, the governments, plural, and the company, so they could share in the decision making, and that fund will be put aside forever, for the long term. They concretely engaged with the company to play a role in monitoring the activities themselves of the mine, so the community itself could see and draw its own judgments about whether or not the company was living up by its commitments. They empowered the community through providing the resources so they could have the technical capacity to play that role effectively. Now, once you give that responsibility to the community, they have to be held to account to discharge in an effective way. Because with that kind of responsibility comes accountability. That project is now running with an absolute sense of trust, of good feeling, that it is there as much for the community as it is for the company. That's an example, and that's definitely the elements of that I'm sure are going to play in other solutions that come along.
We're out of time. I apologize to our remaining questioners, but I see Alice giving me the eye. Maybe you could come up if you have a particular question afterwards, and we can address it offline. But I want to thank the panel and particularly the audience for a very spirited session, and we'll move onward. Thank you.